The report also sets out capital expenditure proposals for 2022-23, totalling £780,000, and these are included in Appendix D. The report also acknowledges that unearmarked reserves have increased by £75,000 and totalled £1.294 million as at March 2021. This should be viewed against a minimum balance set by members of £900,000. Earmarked reserves have increased by nearly £4 million over the same period and total £8.941 million at March 2021. The main reason for this is, as explained in the report, to hold Section 31 business rates grants, which will be released to the collection fund to smooth the impact of business rates deficit over the next 3 years. The next steps with this report are to receive the local government finance settlement in December, to present draft budget proposals to overview and scrutiny on the 18th of January, for the Hub Committee to recommend the final proposals on the 1st of February, and for full Council to consider that final budget on the 15th of February, followed by the Council Tax Resolution Panel later that month. Members, are there any questions regarding the papers in front of you? I have no questions coming forward, so thank you once again to the finance team for obviously a very comprehensive report. In which case, members, I would like to move the proposals which are contained, if I can scroll down quickly. I think, did you say page 44, Councillor Cheadle? On page 44 of your notes. Could I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Cheadle. Members, any debate? I have no debate coming forward. Obviously, this is the culmination of many months' work, and members will be well versed in the proposal that have come forward via the member workshop and other communications. So thank you for that. We'll move straight to a vote.
Sorry, Leader. I've got a question from Councillor Pearce is, what is going to happen in relation to the stringent requirements for private landlords in relation to let properties being no more than a Class C in terms of heating and insulation, which comes forward over the next couple of years? Thank you.
My immediate reaction to that is I don't know what the implications of that will be. I don't know if anyone has information on that or whether that's something that we will investigate and come back to Councillor Pearce after the meeting. Mr. Powell, have you got any?
Happy to take it if you like, Leader. So I think we're absolutely happy to take that question away and come back. I don't think it has a direct bearing in terms of the paper in front of us, but there will be implications for people who are letting their properties, and I think it's perhaps more of a housing question than it is a revenue budget question, but it's an important one, and I'm happy that we take that away and we respond to Councillor Pearce outside the meeting, Leader.
Thank you. If you could note that, Mr. White, and we'll respond in due course. Any other debate, members? In which case, we'll move to a vote on the recommendations. All those in favour?
That's 8 and unanimous. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. If we could then move on to item 11. I can just get my agenda. So, item 11, West Devon housing challenges, and if I could ask Councillor Ratcliffe to introduce this paper.
Thank you, Leader. I'm pleased to introduce the Homes report to this committee. The report seeks to set out lobbying activities the Council may wish to engage in, which complements our operational endeavours of the homeless strategy, Better Homes and Better Lives, and other actions we may wish to continue. The picture for our residents is certainly challenging at the moment, and the Council has demonstrated through its actions in prioritising homes in the plan for West Devon and devising a new housing strategy just 8 months ago that we are committed to doing and what we can do to help others who live in our communities. In addition, the report also asks members to consider the success of the Council's 5-year homeless strategy, which concludes in April 2022, and agree the approach proposed for the next strategy. This Council has a strong track record in the prevention of homelessness and our commitment to ending rough sleeping. The plan is the new strategy to provide the tools to continue with this good work. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor. Members, any questions? Councillor Cheadle.
Thanks very much. I've got 3 questions, but I'm happy to draw them one at a time and get an answer to one and then move on to the next. That's probably the easiest way of doing it. The first one is with regard to para 2.7, which makes the point that the joint local plan lays down how many affordable homes should be built. And in fact, that target is being exceeded. But elsewhere in the paper, and in fact later on in that same paragraph, it hints that that's not solving the problem. So, and it touched on this at the housing meeting earlier today. When the JLP gets reviewed, should we review our 30% quotient on affordable housing if, by the sounds of this paper, we simply aren't building enough of it?
Thank you, Chairman. Pass the parcel. Yeah, it did come up earlier, and I'll probably give a fairly similar answer. But at the time when we took the JLP through the process of getting it approved through the inspector, that was as high as it could go at that time. How high it can go is very closely linked to how good your evidence base is. And you'll have seen earlier in our briefing that we have started gathering the housing need assessment now, and that will form part of the process by which we work out what the maximum threshold is that is viable, genuinely viable in our interpretation as opposed to a developer's interpretation, and what the inspector will let us pass when considering all of the other tensions that we will also want to achieve in terms of transport and accessibility and climate change and many other things. But I do believe it ought to be our aspiration for that to be as high as possible whilst not turning the tap off entirely for development, because, of course, no development is just as bad as the wrong kind. I hope that helps.
Yes, I mean, I know it's not quite the same, but in Dartmoor National Park, their quotient is 50, and that doesn't turn developers off and doesn't wreck viability plans. So some places, a higher threshold works. I mean, I take your answer is that we'll look at it again when we look at the JLP revision.
Councillor, absolutely correct, yes, and I agree with your point. It's a case-by-case basis, and we need to make our case.
My second question is with regard to para 4.3, and this is the whole issue, and I'm not going to delve down into it now, about the inequitable business rate homes saga. But I wondered if one of the things that isn't mentioned in the paper is the rise of Airbnb and the impact that it might have on available letting market. And there are stories in the press of tenants being evicted by people who feel it's in their interest to let their rooms out on Airbnb. Are we seeing that in West Devon?
Yes. That was work. Yes, we are starting to see that. It's not as prevalent as in some of our coastal neighbours, and the reaction they're having to the Airbnb, but it's certainly on the rise. We've got anecdotal evidence of landlords evicting people to take advantage of the Airbnb.
I suppose my follow-on question is there anything we can do about it when we catch it?
a landlord at the moment can issue a notice with no fault and ask for 2 months' notice. That's really within their prerogative to be able to do that at any stage. All we can do around the Airbnb market is to make sure that we look at all the opportunities that we've got to influence that. So make sure that they are on a commercial waste collection. Make sure that they are on the right the council tax or business rates, and that's being looked at properly. That their property is being kept in a good standard, and that any complaints about the standard of that accommodation are dealt with swiftly. So there's things that we can do, but they're more incremental than any sort of big picture to look at banning it. I don't know if Sophie wants to.
Yes, I mean, I think, as we've agreed elsewhere, this is a multi-stranded issue, and no one thing's going to solve it. But I don't think we want to rest until we've looked under every single stone. We've got sort of the abuse of the business rates. We don't quite know how much, but we know it's happening. We've got the impact of Airbnb and whether we're sort of on the tail of that, chasing it. Because there's no doubt about it, looking at the graphs and the statistics in this paper in front of us, the problem's getting worse every day. And I think, as the leaders mentioned on more than one occasion, this is probably our biggest problem. My final question is with regards to paragraph I've lost the ability to control my cursor. There's a recommendation in the paper. Sorry, my computer's not working properly. On a proposal to look again at S106 contributions and how they're used. Sorry about that. I need to find the paragraph, and I can't move my cursor. What's that? Oh, that's a mouse. I'll try and do it before that. I'll come back to that. Let others ask questions.
Thanks, Councillor Cheadle. Councillor Leach.
Yeah, I want to go back to the percentage of affordability, affordable houses. It really doesn't matter if we have 20, 30, 40, 50, 60% affordable housing. As defined at the moment, but if the biggest percentage of those affordable houses aren't affordable, i.e. shared equity and all the other elements are classed as affordable, what we do need, now it's a question, is it time that we do come up with a different definition and go either back to social housing or purely true affordable houses, and then have 30%. If that 30% that's in the agreements with the developers includes shared equity, 80% off, and all the other schemes, it really doesn't show a true reflection of what we actually need, which is good quality rented accommodation.
Thank you, Councillor Leach. Certainly agree with your last comment. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the definitions are set out and they're not for us to change. There are national definitions, but I don't know whether, Ms. Blake, you might like to comment about the balance of affordable, social, and other types of instruments that might be used.
Yes, I completely share Councillor Leach's frustrations with some of the affordability, particularly in the private sector, which is because the private sector has become so unaffordable. People are looking to the council more and more to find some affordable accommodation. And I think that is one of our biggest challenges. We're also, the market itself at the moment, with the issue, with the high value of land, with the high cost of building, means that it's stacked against us. So some of those conversations around viability might get more challenging. I don't know, Alex, do you want to add anything to what I've said?
Just that obviously within the joint local plan, we do ask for 65% at social rent. So we did have the discussion sort of like earlier on today about the differences between that affordable rent and social rent. And it's quite a vast difference, that 20%. We do need to have some intermediate affordable products as well in order for those people that have the ability to support a mortgage to be able to get onto the housing ladder. But I think members will now start to see a lot of those social rented properties coming through with the recent developments that are coming on board now. So I hope it gives you some comfort that we are trying to get the cheapest affordable product that we can get.
Thank you. Councillor Leach, did you want to come back on that at all?
Only just to say, does it give me solace? No, I'm sorry, it doesn't. And yes, I understand that this terminology is national, but I think at least one council needs to step out of line and change this terminology to make it more realistic as to what we're trying to do. So let government call it what they like, but let's get down to grassroots for us.
I think I'm all in favour of coming up with imaginative and different solutions if we can, and I think we need to do that as we've set out, working with partners and working with other agencies in a number of different areas. I don't think there's a short-term fix to this, but it's certainly something that we need to be addressing as a priority, if not our main priority, over coming months and years probably. It's going to be a never-ending problem. I take your point, Councillor Leach, and I think if anything, we need to be try and work out ways of working to maximise the benefit and to try and get somewhere towards satisfying the need. And that's easy to say and not so easy to do, but we will work on it. Any other questions? Councillor Daniel.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask a question about homelessness and rough sleeping. I understand our numbers have been quite low across West Devon, probably as a result of us having a strong strategy. But as we've heard touched upon today, those numbers are likely to be rising. And what response will we have to these new challenges? Thank you.
I think I can provide an answer. Councillor Ratcliffe, do you want to answer that, or would you like me to have a go?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I will initially that the figures are very low, and I think I'm correct in saying that there probably is only one registered homeless person within our area. I think this is encouraging, but yes, the national statistics are very bad, and I agree with the question which has been asked. We must form a strategy for it, or in the case that the numbers do increase.
I mean, as far as I'm aware, and again, I stand to be corrected if I'm wrong, we have had some funding for an outreach officer. That outreach officer has been extremely successful in making sure that anyone who is genuinely rough sleeping is accommodated. I'm pretty sure that it's fair to say that we make contact with everybody who's identified as rough sleeping, and if they are not accommodated, it's because they don't wish to be helped rather than the other way around. And we have now taken the decision to bring that outreach officer onto our payroll and make it a permanent full-time post and to continue that good work. Is that a fair summary, Mrs. Blake?
Yes, I think she's done. having the outreach post has been really quite powerful actually, and being able to intervene, work with somebody, make sure no door's the wrong door, and get them in when they're ready. We did some really great work over the pandemic about bringing people in. There was this national campaign, everybody in, and everybody was in West Devon. So yeah, it's a statutory function to have a rough sleeping strategy. As you'll see from the proposals, we're looking at rough sleeping as a separate group, and in the new strategy, and we look forward to working with members on that through the consultation process about bringing forward the new action plan.
Thank you. Any other questions, members? Councillor Cheadle.
Yeah, thankfully I've found the ability to control my mouse now. So yes, it was the whole paragraph on providing capital funding where it's needed and taking a big picture view, Section 106 agreements in the paper. And I'm not against what's set out there, but it is, I think, quite a fundamental change that's in front of us. If you turn to para 4.26, it says, insofar as the council is permitted by law to do so, but I'm not quite sure quite where the law comes in this, but no doubt our expert sitting to my left will advise. It means that we will look at S106 contributions on a needs basis first, and proximity to the planning application second, and the support for them within the communities third. So a translation of that might be a big development, let's say in Tavistock, generates some S106 money for affordable housing, which we choose to build in Princetown. I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's a change from what happens at the moment.
Chairman, would I be able to make a comment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Brooke.
Just it's the nuance of the paragraph. So it actually reads, members are asked to formally recognise and support proximity and location in that order, and support it within their communities, as opposed to ignoring the support of the community, which would be quite a brave thing to do, I think. So we're not asking to ignore the support of the community at all. We're asking members to consider how we can best spend Section 106 money. Clearly, if there is a need close to the planning application, as per the planning Section 106 and how it's drafted within the framework for that, that's where 106 funding would be spent. What we wouldn't want to see happen is Section 106 money being given back where there's clear need in close proximity, but quite possibly just over the way, that we then aren't spending the money on. So it's about having a really sensible understanding of need. That's the first thing, and we're resourcing that up, and we saw it a little bit earlier in our discussions around housing and housing need. And then it's ensuring that we work within the Section 106 framework to ensure that it's drafted as it needs to be. And basically, it's to ensure that we can deliver the most number of affordable houses we can where they are needed. And sometimes that might not be immediately adjacent to the location that actually was the contributor to that 106. So taken cold, it might seem quite radical, but the reality is it's unlikely to be quite as stark as Oakhampton and Tavistock, or Tavistock and Chudley, or wherever. So Chagford, rather. So, but we are asking members to recognise it. So it's good that you flagged it up, because if it was missed by anybody else, then I think it's important that it's considered.
Thank you, Mr. Brooke. Does that make some sense, Councillor Cheadle?
It does, but I think we're going to have to be careful. This has a sort of tinderbox feel about it to me, that if you're building a whopping great housing estate in location A, and the residents are by and large not happy about that, and by and large no one is happy about a large housing estate being built next to them, and then you say that the 106 contributions are going to be distributed elsewhere, don't be surprised when they get slightly tetchy about that.
And I think that's, sorry, forgive me for joining in the discourse, but I think that's a really good point. And I just would say that the primary way we seek to ensure affordable housing is met is actually on site. So our first and strongest discussions through the housing team with developers are always on site, and large sites, by and large, deliver that. It's actually the smaller, more unusual sites that sometimes then give a Section 106 contribution. So it doesn't take away from your point, which is very well made, but in terms of frequency of occurrence and volumes of, or the amount of money, it's probably lower than we might be thinking.
I think there's a sort of PR job in here as well somewhere, that if we are going to make a sort of slightly unusual decision, we need to make sure that that's well communicated.
Thank you. I think that's noted, Councillor Cheadle. Any other questions, members? In which case, Councillor Ratcliffe, could I ask you to move the recommendations?
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I would like to move the recommendations, which can be found on page 81 of this agenda or this document, and that is both parts 1 and parts 2. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Cheadle, thank you. Members, any debate? In which case, we'll move to a vote. All those in favour of the recommendations?
That's 8 and unanimous. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, members. If we can move to item 12, the Climate Change and Biodiversity Action Plan update. If I could ask Councillor Daniel to introduce this item. Councillor Daniel.
Thank you, Chair. Councillors, you have seen a copy of the updated Climate Change and Biodiversity Action Plan. This is the 6-monthly update. Since we last presented the plan, the councillors have agreed the plan for West Devon with the natural environment section contained within it. We have agreed to pursue plans in the near future, which are also detailed in the West Devon plan, as those within our scope to achieve. The Climate and Biodiversity Appendix has also been reviewed as recommended at the last Hub and ONS meetings. It's been revised to be more focused on areas either where West Devon Council has influence or we have direct control. That's not to say we won't include some ambitious aims as time goes on. The plan is an evolving document, and as situations change or grants and opportunities become available, West Devon will aim to pursue these. The appendix has been colour-coded to allow ease of use. So green sections are completed areas, amber are those in progress, red are plans and areas not yet possible and so probably recommended for withdrawal. And also some white sections have yet to be reviewed. I would like to thank Adam Williams, our climate change specialist, for his work in compiling and maintaining the climate change and biodiversity plan, and for his work in running the Community Climate Forum. This group actively contributes to our climate change and biodiversity plan. Any questions? Oh, sorry, I would also like to say that there is a whole list of achievements and things that we're already doing within this document. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cheadle.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, my first question was going to be, what do the colours mean? But so the next time it's printed, it might be worth putting a little legend on saying what the different colours mean. My question is all about new developments, and much has been in the news recently about the government's push towards heat pumps, and I touched on this at an earlier debate. But I note from planning applications that are coming through at the moment for relatively large developments, heat pumps are nowhere to be seen. In fact, the accompanying documents are sort of viability studies saying why they're not fitting heat pumps rather than whether they are or not. So there seems to be a sort of juxtaposition between things we want to do and things the government want us to do, like when we build new homes, put heat pumps in, and what's actually happening. And right now, as we speak, developments are being approved with gas boilers in. And I just wondered where does that fit in this plan?
Could I pass you over to our climate change officer, because they can talk about Dev 2 Dev 32 Plus of the JLP. Thank you.
Yeah, so yeah, you're very right. In terms of where we are with the ability to ask for heat pumps on developments at the moment, you'll note in item K under 4 point, I forget, 4.3, where we had a successful appeal recently in terms of our ability to use the climate emergency in our decision making. So what we're doing at the moment with the Joint Local Plan team is to scope up a Dev 32 plus guidance sort of document to allow us to push the boundaries a bit more on what we're asking for developers. And heat pumps will obviously feature in that, but one of the main things we've got to bear in mind is the ability for large amounts of heat pumps to come online at one time can create network constraints of Western Power. So we're actually having a meeting with them in a few weeks' time to discuss that point so we can get over those technical issues before we start pushing that a bit more within our planning policy.
Yes, interestingly, the document that I was reading, which was an accompanying document to a significant planning application, did a viability study and actually came to the conclusion, rightly or wrongly, that heat pumps were worse for the environment than gas boilers. I'm not expecting you to comment on this. I could send you the reference and I'd be interested in whether, in fact, it's a load of hot air, if you'll excuse the expression, or whether there's actually some truth in it. Certainly the commentary was also about the costs, that the cost of running a heat pump, with electricity costs being what they are, is more expensive for the occupant of the house than the gas boiler, running a gas boiler. And I'm not suggesting it should be cheaper, but I mean, if that's what's happening, it's no surprise that the market is being driven sort of off heat pumps and onto gas boilers, because people want them because they're cheaper to run.
Yeah, so they are quite good points, but I think I don't know the reference you're talking about, so I'll be happy to read through that and come back to you on that point. But when it comes to new build properties, running a heat pump is far cheaper than heating a house off of gas. And the main thing to bear in mind in terms of the environmental impacts, in normal circumstances, we haven't got gas wholesale prices what they are, and obviously gas wholesale prices affect our electricity supply because we are reliant on gas-fired power stations some of the time in terms of our energy mix as well. The emissions factor of electricity is a lot lower than gas. So in normal circumstances, the emissions from a heat pump are much lower than running it off gas as well.
I'll send you the document. I'll be interested in your comments. Could I have them before next Tuesday?
No problem.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mott, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I was really just going to mention the planning appeal that we had sight of, which made interesting reading. But I would like clarity, please. Sorry, Adam, did you say 4.3 in the document? I'm struggling to find 4.3 on the. I've got 4.2.
Yeah, it should be 4.3, item K.
What page are we on, please? Thank you. I'll find.
Is that okay? Thank you. Councillor Crozier.
Thank you, Leader. This, along with Councillor Cheadle, this whole thing has been driven by pseudo-economics. It's good for the developer to put in a system that's going to be redundant in 15 years because it's cheaper for him today. We talk about heat pumps. Now, are they still the cheapest solution, I ask? Probably not. If you're building a block of houses, surely there's a heating system that can heat all the houses for one cost for everybody, a shared cost. This can be measured still by heat units delivered to each house. be interested to hear any thoughts on that.
So these would be neighbourhood heating systems, effectively. It'd be interesting to know how that is covered within our planning guidelines, if we know that, or whether we need to look at that and come back with further information in due course. I'm looking at Mr. Powell. I'm looking at Mr. Williams in that case.
Yeah, you are right. There are other options. I mean, heat pumps aren't the silver bullet to our heating problems. There's lots of other solutions out there, from district heating to ground source heat pumps as well. So the geothermal as well, and things like that. There's lots of options out there for us to explore, and we need to take it on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. We need to keep an open mind and keep abreast of the way things are developing. It's a very complex area, and often I think the science is moving faster than we're able to respond in terms of our policies and planning documents. Any comeback on that, Councillor Crozier, or is that okay for now?
Thank you. No, I take your comments, and yes, you're right in some respects, but there's a lot of technology that they know a lot about, but they're afraid to use at the moment, I believe.
Well, I think you're right, and I share your concern about getting cheapest cost now as against the cost over the life of the house, which is what we've got to try and address and bring forward. Yeah. Any other questions, members? In which case, if I could ask Councillor Daniel to move the recommendations.
I'd like to move the recommendation on page 107 of your papers. The recommendation is that the Hub Committee approves the updated Climate Change and Biodiversity Action Plan as set out in Appendix A of the presented report. I'd like to move the recommendation.
Thank you. Could I have a seconder, please? Yep. Councillor Cheadle, thank you. Members, any debate? Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's great that we're able to do some of the things that we are hoping to do in here. However, I feel that this needs strong leadership and good communication between members, the public and the council. Is there a possibility for feedback from the community? We don't seem to have much input from them at the moment, and I'm aware that we are still trying to schedule in our committees to be able to discuss this and how we move this forward. I do feel, though, that we have to be very careful in how we approach the subject with our residents. We have got the risk of beginning to alienate and marginalise some of the members of our community with this document, and I think we need to be very careful in how we move forward with some of the projects that we've got in here.
Thank you, Councillor Mott. I don't know whether there's any comment. I know that, Mr. Williams, you're running some community engagement groups, but is there any scope for expanding that? I suppose would be one question. I think the second thing that I would want to raise on the back of Councillor Mott's contribution to the debate is that I think I'm right in saying that these proposals haven't yet been discussed by the Natural Environment Advisory Group, and I think the next step must be to give them a really good look at from that group and to hone them down perhaps still further into things that we can achieve and are prioritising to achieve. So I don't know if there's any feedback on that. Mr. Powell?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I mean, certainly in terms of the community group, it's working. We've got a lot of people involved, but we could do with more. And I think if we were to widen the net of that group to some of the actual active community groups rather than just individuals, I think that would set up a better network in terms of that wider communication between the council and the community. So that's something we consider if members felt that was appropriate. And in terms of a meeting of the advisory group, yes, I think that'd be really beneficial. We've got the outcome of the citizens panel around the Devon carbon plan, which is a number of recommendations which need to be discussed by members before we put forward the council's opinion on that. Some of them are potentially controversial, especially for a rural community. So I'd welcome both those recommendations.
Thank you. I think that that feedback from the citizens panel could well be the catalyst for this discussion, as you've quite rightly said. And then we as a council need to sort of hone down what we're doing. And I wonder whether there is perhaps also some room for engagement with the members of the advisory group in the community groups that you're talking about as well, not en bloc, but just to get feedback and be able to feed that back into the system. Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you, Leader. Well, that last discussion has actually prompted a question, and I know we're in debate, so I'm struggling to think how I can perhaps put this forward. But I assume that the action plan update has come from the advisory group. Now I understand it hasn't. So what is the process? You haven't got to answer this because I know we're out of questions. I mean, I'm now thinking, is the Climate Change Committee, which was originally formed in 2019 when we declared the climate emergency, I'm not sure now whether they're still operating, and if so, I guess they've put forward these suggestions. So I'll have to clarify that outside of the meeting, but I was under the misapprehension that this was coming through the advisory group. Had I known that wasn't the case, I would have raised the question at the appropriate time. But I will perhaps get clarification of that outside of the meeting. But that, I'm now confused as to, is there a climate change committee which originated this action plan? Where does it sit now? And where does the delivery plan, which is in the West Devon plan, how does that relate to this action plan? So I'm afraid there's confusion on my part, so I will endeavour to clarify that as I've missed the opportunity to raise it at the appropriate time.
That's okay, Councillor Edmonds. I think Mr. Powell is able to provide some clarity on where we are, and I think the reason that the advisory group hasn't met is one of resourcing and scheduling, and that, as we've said, the feedback from the Devon climate panel will be the catalyst for having that discussion. But Mr. Powell, perhaps you could add some clarity.
I will endeavour to do so. Yeah, it is one of timing. We've obviously the actual theme is around natural environment. It's wider than just climate change and biodiversity. We'd already adopted the climate change and biodiversity strategy and action plan, and we'd committed to doing a 6-monthly review. The process going forward, subject to members' approval, will be to combine the climate change update with the thematic update around the natural environment once we've had one of those meetings. So it's simply one of timing. There isn't a climate change and biodiversity working group anymore. There is our community forum, which is what I was talking about earlier on, and the proposal will be to extend that community forum wider to bring some of the community groups in to better engage with the entire community. We're building up really good relationships with those established groups. And then we bring forward a full thematic update and the action plan. When members approved the action plan, they gave delegated authority to my role to make changes to the action plan, which has happened over time. Yeah, hopefully that explains for you, Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you, that's helpful. Members, any other debate?
Leader, I've got a comment from Councillor Pearce, who wishes to put on record his support for the comments of Councillor Mott.
Thank you. We'll note that accordingly. Mr. Powell, did you want to make another comment?
If I could, Leader, just one comment. I think we've got an answer to Councillor Pearce's previous question. So if you look at 4.3A, members, if I ask you to do that, that hopefully answers Councillor Pearce's question about what we will do about enforcement within the private sector housing community with the new standards. We've secured some funding to do that, to work actively with the private landlords to try and seek improvement in that area. We have an enforcement role, but clearly our first role will be to work proactively with them to support the improvement in that part of the housing stock.
Thank you. Hopefully that's helpful to Councillor Pearce and everybody else. Thank you, Mr. Powell. Any other debate, members? In which case we'll move to a vote. So all those in favour of the recommendation?
That's unanimous. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. And thank you, members. That brings the